it takes the mystery out of advertising a little bit when you understand how to test things and what you're looking for, because then it becomes a game to me of, oh, I tried this, it didn't work. Well, let me try option B. And you just kind of start cycling down the list versus just shooting in the dark repeatedly.
You are now listening to the Creative Juice podcast, brought to you by Entrepreneur.io.
What's up, Indies? Welcome back to the Creative Juice podcast. This is episode 257. I am your host, Jack McCarthy. With me is my co-host, your co-pilot, Mr. Ed Isola. Ed, what's going on, dude?
Dude, I'm having a good day. It's co-pilot is a nice term, so I'm ready to fly through this episode.
Me too, man. I'm excited to get into the nitty-gritty a little bit for our listeners here about process, and specifically some marketing processes that we use day in, day out, week in, week out at IndieX that I think will be helpful for anyone who's really getting into the weeds with their own marketing or their own marketing with their teams. And that's the topic of testing. You know, you kind of hear this all the time, like in marketing, you should test everything. When you're running ads for your music, you should be testing. It's kind of like, it gets to the point where it almost seems like it's a buzzword that people like to throw around, you know, like you should test, but there's never any, there's often not a whole lot of guidance around like what to test or how to test.
Dude, and I think that that's so important because, like what you just said, there's not a lot of guidance around how to test things. And actually testing stuff, I feel like now that I understand what we're doing, is pretty easy and pretty straightforward. And before I understood it, it was very overwhelming. And I felt like I would just be like, in my mind, be like, I want to run ads to this thing. I'm going to throw them out there. If they work, they work. If they don't, they don't. And I felt like I had no lifeline to say like, okay, well, if they're not working, here's how I can fix them. And testing allows you to kind of go through and incrementally understand why something's working, why something's not working. So if it is working, you can up it. If it's not, you can try to fix that piece. And so I think it's a really cool thing because it takes the mystery out of advertising a little bit when you understand how to test things and what you're looking for, because then it becomes a game to me of, oh, I tried this, it didn't work. Well, let me try option B. And you just kind of start cycling down the list versus just shooting in the dark repeatedly.
For sure. Yeah, I definitely agree. And a lot of the tools that we use, and as like advertising platforms, using that as an example, as they get better, testing within an ad platform becomes easier and easier to do. But as a marketer and as a smart musician, you have to think about what you want to test and how you're going to test and really what the reason for even doing it is. And that's a lot of what we spend our time on at the agency internally when we're kind of strategizing on behalf of our clients. A lot of the discussion that we have, and I think this is a helpful place to kind of kick off talking about this, is a lot of the place that we start having conversation about is around, okay, what problems are we trying to solve? Or if we're not trying to solve a problem, what do we think we could make incrementally better in the marketing that we're doing? What could be made better? What could be tested against itself to try and get a better result? And that's really where we start a lot of our work. And if you're kind of getting into testing 101 here, I think those are two questions that I would say you should ask yourself is, okay, what do I have in front of me right now? What am I working with kind of across all of your marketing? Like look at the things that you're doing, whether it's advertising or it's email marketing, and look to see, okay, how are these things doing? And where could I potentially pull out better results? And then once you do that, you can say, okay, how do I want to test those things? Or do I have an idea of what it is that I want to try out? Yeah.
And I think that, like, just to expand on what you just said, that's really insightful that people listening may not understand, like might not grasp initially, is that those are actually like 2 or 3 very distinct phases of testing. It's not all just, oh, I'm going to sit down and be like, oh, what do I want to test? And what are the parts? And how do I do it? It's very much, when you said that, I was like, oh, yes, that's how you do it. But it's not like all within 20 minutes. Those are the things you're kind of looking at. And it's funny because I wrote down too, and you started talking the same thing. I was like, well, where do you start when you're like, okay, I want to test, but what am I even going to test? But you said you kind of want to look at like, what is the problem or what is the goal that we're trying to accomplish? that's the target. And for me, when it comes to testing, you can go down tons of different avenues and tons of different paths. But when you start out, if you have a very clear goal of what you're trying to accomplish from the ad campaign, that kind of gives you like a North Star or whatever you want to call it, so that you can measure your changes to your campaign against, does it get me closer to this goal? Whether that's, I want to get email subscribers for $2, or I want to make $1,000 off of my store from running ads, whatever. Like, when you have a fixed point that you're trying to reach, you can really just easily be like, okay, I did this and it took me the opposite direction, so let me do something else. And I think that that's just a little bit of an expansion on what you were just saying. But then number two is, once you have that North Star, so to speak, of your marketing goal, it then becomes, like Jack said, well, what are the parts of this campaign, right? Like, okay, you've got a lot of times, and I think we're going to get into this more, but you've got the creative, you've got the copy, you've got the audience, you've got the type of campaign. Those are all things that if you change them are either going to move you closer to your goal or further away from your goal. And it's okay to test them. It's great to test them, but understanding the parts allows you to kind of dissect them and be like, I almost view it at this point as like a lever of like, oh, well, what if I change the audience and I slide that lever up? Oh, that's not what I wanted. Let me pull it back down. Because you can do things and undo them when it comes to advertising, which is cool if you have that goal and you understand the parts.
Yeah, it's true. And I think this even goes beyond this definitely goes beyond advertising into really everything. I know we were having a conversation. I've had a few conversations recently with clients at the agency, and we were talking recently about the 502s, about testing out, for example, hyperlinked text in emails versus full spelled out or full copied and pasted links, and what impact that would have on click-through rates. And I had recently done some split testing for a client to see what the impact of that would be on their click-through rates to their email list. And it was really interesting and telling data to get back from those tests, doing it over a period of time and comparing to, like you said, having a North Star goal, which was, what is the impact of this test on our goal, which was the click-through rate. That was our KPI. And with that, what is our control? What are we looking at as kind of the starting point, the baseline result that we know we've gotten with our previous way of doing it? And I say that to say a lot of the testing that we do at IndieX, apart from, normal testing that you might do just generally when you're running campaigns, you've got a few different ad creatives, for example, you've got a few different types of ad copy going in a campaign. Those are kind of your normal sort of tests that you run at a micro level at a campaign. A lot of the testing that we kind of look at systemically across the agency to identify trends and patterns and test and compare against wisdom and ideas and hypotheses that are kind of floating around as best practices in marketing, is we look to say, okay, what are some goals that we want to shoot for? What are some problems that we want to solve? What are some things that are going on in our clients' marketing right now that we can test against? And what are ideas that are floating around out there that we either want to try to validate or challenge? And how do those sort of four categories work together? And then what we start to do is really every month across the team, we identify anywhere from 5 to 10 of these different tests that we can perform. And then we start working on them either in our own marketing that we're doing at the company, either in our own marketing that we're doing for our own music projects, or when client campaigns or marketing work allows for it, allow to test for the benefit of our clients, which is pretty cool. And then what we start to do is week to week, we measure the results against that North Star, those North Star results, those controls that we've identified at the very, very beginning. And then we look to see, okay, this week, every week we put together a report and we say, this week, the results that my testing got me were XYZ. And then the following week, you might iterate on that test a little bit and change some things. For example, I was recently testing for a client the impact of having 4 times the amount of ads in an ad set versus just a standard. I was running with around 4 or 5 ads in an ad set versus I think I was running 16 in an ad set against it, to see what kind of impact that would have on the campaign, to kind of test the wisdom and, quote unquote, some best practices out there about having a ton of creatives and a ton of copy variants and seeing whether that would have a negative impact over optimization over the long term. So we were looking to see, how would this change and what would this test kind of pan out to look like over weeks. And that brings back to something you said, Ed, is that like this testing, real true testing, like this, where you're trying to challenge ideas and challenge the best result that you can pull out, it definitely doesn't happen over 20 seconds. It happens over, weeks at a time. And it doesn't really happen over one test either. A lot of times you need to test and then retest in a different setting to really validate whether your ideas were true or a fluke.
Yeah, and true or a fluke, and if they apply to you, because the thing that's interesting here is that with marketing, and I'm curious if you agree, I would bet you probably do, but it's not like there's one truth for every artist or every campaign. Where Jack said, "Hell, we were testing how many different variants of ads inside a campaign more or less positively impact it." So you went through the test for this artist. Just was it more or less ads that you found? I'm just curious.
Actually, it was less.
Right.
It was less. We were seeing like ad sets with 5 to 6 ads were outperforming ad sets with 15 to 20 ads.
Yeah. And so my point was going to be like, I've done testing for the 502s where I found for our show promotion type stuff, we can get way better results if we have 20 ads in there. Right. And my point is not to say like, oh, Jack's test was not right. My point is to say that like they had an idea, they went through and tested it, and the truth for that artist is different than what was true for me. And that's kind of the whole point of testing. It's not like you just sit down and be like, this is the truth of this campaign. So if I do this, I'm going to get this result. You kind of have to work through it and figure out and test for yourself what works best. And so that's the one thing where people are like very precious about it. And I think when you come to like why you test, don't be too concerned about like, oh man, I had one, operate within your budget, but 2, don't be so concerned about like, oh, I had a whole week where I didn't get a free plus shipping and handling funnel. Like there's things that you're spending or purchase, like your things that you're spending your money on a lot of times that serve the bigger goal where you're testing, oh, these types of campaigns work for streaming. These types of things work for this. And there's starting points, but it really does vary across the board. And so I think that's why testing is so valuable. I feel like we've kind of hit really well why we test things. Do you want to kind of dive into like how we actually go through testing?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I think that's an interesting question to ask in light of you mentioning testing within 502s for show promotion, for example, and how having a ton of different ad creatives in an ad set panned out well for you versus the test that I was just running. And I almost want to use this as an example of these are exactly the kind of conversations that we have when we meet as a team to talk about the results of our test. And really like what Ed and I could now go do is like comparing the results of these 2 tests that we ran independent of each other. Now, if we were to go take these results and continue this test into a different type of campaign, potentially for a different artist or band, to really further consolidate down our ideas and really try to make a determination of like what's working best and why, what is the best practice that we should go with and why. This is a really great example of how, one test doesn't determine your truth, multiple do, and changing them over time and getting true data based off setting up a test exactly the same or as close to it as possible to really have like a true benchmark, a true kind of control and variable, and then consolidating your results and discussing them to come up with what you think your answer is, and then, most important, how you would apply that towards the future. These are exactly the conversations that we have usually on Tuesdays. We record podcasts on Tuesdays typically. We also have IndieX team meetings on Tuesdays. So a few hours before this, these are the exact kind of conversations that we have in our tests about our tests.
And what's really cool about that too is like, I think like like you said, as a part of IndieX, we have a lot of these conversations as a part of the Indiepreneur community in the Facebook group and stuff like that. People are having these conversations, and it's not like anybody has any pride about, well, no, this is my campaign. It's like a lot of people just want whatever works best for them and gets results. So that's where the collaborative nature of it is so cool, because we could be like, I don't think that's right. All right, let me go test it for a week. Oh, it turns out it was right, or like, oh, this is what I found. And so it is so iterative. And that's what's cool about it. And then like, that's why the testing is so important, even for yourself, where say you're not in the entrepreneur community for some reason, we don't know, but like, say you're at home and you're testing, you can still start with, hey, here's what I think. And then if you're honest with yourself, well, I think if I run this kind of campaign to this place, I'm going to see an increase in my streams. Okay, go do it. If it doesn't work, you can say, well, that was wrong, right? Like, you're going to cover more ground quicker if you're collaborating with people and communicating, like Jack said, where there's 7 or 8 of us on the call on Tuesdays at this point.
Yep.
It's like everybody's coming, testing things, coming back to like, well, this is what I found. Okay. So we're running 8 tests a week instead of 1. So it's quicker, but you can still do this process individually if you're not at a place where you want to be inside the community or at IndieX.
Yeah. Something I would totally recommend is when you can, if you don't have a team to work with, if you're not working with an agency, or you're not working with us at IndieX, or you're not in the Indepreneur community, or even if you are in the Indepreneur community in general, what I would definitely recommend is like work with a buddy. Maybe you've got a manager who has a roster of artists that they work with. I would say try to partner up together and execute some tests together so that you collectively can get more information on the things that you're trying to learn. And that will make everyone better for it. And that's really, I agree with you. Like, one of the big benefits of doing it as a team is we learn a lot about all of the subjects and the hypotheses that we're trying to test. We learn a lot over, a shorter span of time. But that doesn't mean you have to have a massive team to be doing this. It could be you and one other artist that could be testing a few ideas that you've got against one another. And that could really yield, I think, a lot of helpful information and actionable items that you can really take and then use.
Yeah, and teamwork stretches your budget too. Like, collaboration allows you to test more things that aren't just coming out of your own pocket. I think that's just a really valuable and very point blank observation that, like, if you're concerned as, well, I want to test, but I don't have money to test. Well, it's like, okay, well, partner up with people, because I'm sure that there's people that feel the same way. That's one of the cool things too about all the account managers in IndieX is like everybody pretty much has their own band and is super invested in it. And so we're kind of taking our own money and being like, well, I think this kind of thing. And we all go test it ourselves with our own personal budgets. And then we come back. And then once we figure out what works, then we start to apply it to other people, to clients and stuff like that. But it's cool because it's like collectively we're spending X amount versus, 1/10 of that if we were on our own each month to test things.
Yeah. That's a really good point. I mean, something that we identify even at the agency, when working with clients, is we're very sensitive to the fact that we have our clients and we have our clients' budgets, and a lot of them want to be spending money on the things that work, and we know that, and we have a playbook of things that we know work. So when a client wants to be testing and is interested in that kind of stuff, we also look to identify, and I think this is important for anyone who's doing marketing to recognize, is when you want to do testing, think about things that are both low stakes and high stakes, and how you can choose your test based on that idea. You might not want to be testing super high stakes marketing ideas in the middle of a campaign where you need to make a lot of money, right? Like, that might be something where you run smaller tests that might have a little bit of a lower impact on your bottom line. Or if you need to get a whole bunch of email subscribers ahead of your next album launch, and you've got email marketing campaigns or opt-in campaigns running to get those subscribers and then get them nurtured, that might not be an area, if you've got something working, that might not be an area to do a whole lot of testing right now. It kind of depends on your risk tolerance, because there is always some level of risk in testing. But that's why also we mentioned, like, you want to have a control, something that is your default way or your current way of working that you can go back to and allow to continue to work. A lot of the, I think a lot of people get overwhelmed when it comes to testing because they think about, like, something I'm doing is failing, so I have to test other things. A lot of the stuff that we're talking about here, and this is like just marketing muscle that I think you build up over time, is once you have things that work, then you test new things against it to see, can I make something that works better? And that's the kind of testing that we really like to do a lot of at the agency, is like, how do we pull out more wins out of stuff that we already know is working well?
Dude, I feel like everything you just said is something that I lived when we launched Camp Feels Good. And I feel like that's a really helpful thing to just quickly share. Is that we launched this opt-in campaign for the 502s 2 years ago now, like October of 2020. And our goal, I think we had a budget of like $10,000 or of advertising money, right? And our goal was to get 5,000 subscribers, new email subscribers. And so we kind of start off and we're like, okay, we understand an opt-in campaign. We know that if we have $10,000 to spend and 5,000 subscribers as a goal, that we have to be getting $2 per subscriber. And so that was like our benchmark of like, okay, we need to get a campaign that allows us to run for $2 per subscriber at a high clip. Knowing that, we planned far enough out to be like, this is probably not going to be an easy objective, right? And so we started so far out that we spent like $1,000 just testing campaigns over the course of a month, where it was like, okay, well, this is kind of working. This is not getting us where we want to go. And then me, you, and Circa would get together and we talk about it. And we kept saying like, oh, well, what if you try a lookalike audience of this percent? Or what if you try this? What if you try this? And I feel like in those calls, it was so exciting for me and probably for you too, of just like, we have a budget, but we want to find the thing that works. And like you said, don't get discouraged when you're testing about something failing. I view it more as like you're siphoning through a stack of of options, and you're just looking for that card that's like, that's the one, right? Because it was like, well, it's not for us. It's not warm audience. It's not this. It's not that. It's cold audience. Okay, this is it, right? We ran it for a week. Those results held very steadily. And we said, okay, this is working. Let's ramp the budget up now. And so to Jack's point, you don't have to go dump a bunch of money to test. It was like $5 a day, and we could kind of over the course of a week, so $35, understand this is working. Oh, wait, this is doing 10 times better than this other campaign. So now let's slowly ramp it up. But I think that's really important, because I think a lot of times testing is mistakenly mixed up with wasting money. But it's like you don't have to spend thousands of dollars to know if something works. And I think that's important.
I totally agree. I think that's a really, really great point, and a great story to share kind of about the nature of testing in an environment where, it was a little bit more high stakes, but we looked at things and we said, okay, in this situation that we're trying to test and learn and grow within, because really the goal at the end was growth. We looked at it and said, okay, how can we test and learn about this and get better, but do it in the most controlled fashion possible? And doing that was looking at, what do we have that's working right now? How do we think it could work better? How can we test that in a way that doesn't interrupt what's already working? And how do we learn from the results and then apply them? And that's kind of like, if I were to say how we do test, like those are kind of like the 4 frameworks of testing. And then in terms of how we execute this at the agency week to week is, I'll give you guys a framework that you can use, or a process that you can use in your own music business or with artists that you work with if you're a manager, or something like that. Is at the top of a month, and this is the process that we use at IndieX. At the top of the month, you get together, you ask yourself, what's something that I'm doing that I think I could do better, or I think I could try something different to do better? What's an idea that I've heard out there in the world that I would be curious whether or not it works for me? And then I would pick that topic. I would find a campaign or a marketing process that I have in place, and I would start running down exactly what it was that I wanted to test, and then track your results weekly and compare, make changes as necessary. And I'll share a quick story in a second here of making changes as necessary. Make changes as necessary, track your results for a month, and then at the end of that month, share the results, whittle them down, and then decide what the next thing you're going to test is, whether that's a new iteration of the same test, potentially in a new place or with a new artist, or a completely new test, and then rinse and repeat that. And if you've got more people doing it, the more the merrier. You learn a lot really fast. That's exactly the process that we use at IndieX. And we meet at the beginning of our State of the Union meeting, which is one of our IndieX team meetings that we have. We meet at the beginning of a month to do that, and then we meet at the end of a month to do that. And we also discuss the results in our whole Indepreneur team meetings for sprint reviews. So it kind of allows for everybody to learn about everything that we've got going on. It's pretty dope. Now, to the note of changing tests and pivoting things around as you go, I was testing, as I mentioned, a campaign for an artist where we were testing number of ads in an ad set. And something that we found pretty quick was I was trying to use proven ad creatives and proven audiences. Well, as it turned out, some of the proven audiences that I was using and trying to not interrupt a working campaign at the same time actually ended up to not perform as well. Wasn't performing at the same cost per purchase. It was a sales campaign that we were running. And so I needed to pivot around those audiences to then go and find another proven working audience to run this test with. And so that was something that I had to do in week 2, because week 1 kind of flopped right then and there. And that was, part of the test, part of the learning process was like, okay, whittling this down. How do I make this test give me a clearer piece of data at the end of all of it? How do I get closer to having clear data that I can look at and make educated decisions about? And so that's kind of the rundown of how we test things at IndieX in marketing for our clients. So yeah, hopefully it gives you guys a little bit of a demystification around the idea of testing and gives you some thoughts about what you can test. That way, when you hear people say like, in marketing, it's important to test things, like now you can think about what to actually pick out when you want to run tests and how to go about doing it in a way that really works.
Yeah, it's not just going to feel like, okay, I know, but how? And so hopefully, like Jack said, I always say this because, Jack, you say great, very smart things on this podcast. And so rewind about 4 minutes when Jack listed down the four things, like, you went one by one and you said, here's the 4 things. Those are the things to write down. Those are the takeaways to give you some framework when it comes to testing and hopefully make it not as confusing. But I thought that was like a really, really nice, concise way to say, here's what you do, but here's how you think about it in an actionable way.
Well, hopefully this helps you guys. It gives you a little bit of a breakdown of testing, some things that you can actionably apply in your own music career or with your team. I hope you guys dig it, and we will catch you next time on Creative Juice. Get testing, and peace out, Indies.
Gang got really flipped.